Welcome back to the Patriot and the Preacher. We have a very special guest joining us, and he joined us over 5 years ago when he was running for president. And of course, it's Dr. Ben Carson, who's the former HUD secretary. Dr. Carson, thanks for coming back on.
It's always a pleasure to be with you.
It's great to have you again. And so much has happened since we last had you on the show. So, Dr. Carson, I would, that's an understatement, isn't it? I know that before we get into the current events and what's going on, tell us about American Cornerstone and why you started it and the challenge that you've made to people out there.
Well, the first time I failed retirement. So I thought maybe this time I would retire once the administration was done. But, looking at the direction of the country, I knew that I couldn't relax on the golf course.
Right.
Seeing that our country was going off the cliff. So a number of us from HUD got together and started the American Cornerstone Institute, which emphasizes the founding principles and the cornerstone principles that allowed us to go from a ragtag bunch of militiamen to the most powerful nation that the world has ever seen. And it's cornerstones like our faith, which teaches us how to relate to our fellow man. Love your neighbor, not cancel your neighbor.
Right.
Liberty. This was the beacon of liberty. This was the place where people came so that they could live the lives that they wanted to live without heavy government overreach into every aspect of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And some people say we haven't lost any liberty, but we have, like our freedom of speech. And it's not just the government who can take that away. It's other entities with the compliance of the government, which is exactly what's going on in our society today.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have community, which was so powerful an impact in our country. People with different skills and talents able to work together to help each other. If it was harvest time and a farmer fell out of a tree and broke his leg, everybody harvested its crops and asked him what his political persuasion was.
Right.
That community was incredibly strong in our country. And then life. And as we've gone further away from our appreciation of life from the womb to the tomb, we become much more coarse and callous in our relationships with each other. So we're emphasizing all those things. We're also starting the summer program called Little Patriots, in which we teach our young people the right things, not the critical race theory, but who we really are, warts and all, because that's how you learn.
Sure.
And, this is a fantastic country. My wife and I are thankful every day that we were born in America. I've visited 68 countries. I know the rest of the world. I've lived overseas. We have a gem here. And what we have to realize is that we're the only ones who can destroy it. And we cannot let people manipulate us into thinking we're enemies and destroy our wonderful nation.
Amen. Amen, Dr. Carson. So, I asked our listeners to send in some questions. So before I get to mine, I wanted to ask you a couple of theirs. So knowing everything you just said, how can America find our way forward after all the damage that's been done recently and continues to happen? What do you think?
Well, the key thing is that people have to realize that we all have a sphere of influence.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody at some point has to be the adult in the room. It doesn't work if we get into our respective corners and just throw stones at each other. It doesn't work if we say, well, they did it, therefore I'm going to undo it. Those are really quite childish maneuvers, and they have the concomitant results.
Right. No, that's true. It's true. So getting into current events here, let's talk about the first thing, which is the border crisis and what's going on there. I think you'll agree that it's a national security issue. It's turned into a major health concern because we know 10 to 15% of those illegal immigrants crossing have COVID. And they're being relocated, Dr. Carson, all over the country without
no screening.
With no screening. They're not even telling the governors. They're flying them into Nashville, for instance, in the middle of the night. This is really, if this continues to happen, And it is. It's been going on since after January 20th. Really, the face of the nation is going to be changed, isn't it?
It will, but as far as letting the illegals in without much screening in terms of COVID or treatment, uh, that should tell us something.
Uh-huh.
Look how rapidly the numbers are dropping. Last week, there were only 6,000 cases in the whole nation.
Right.
You're not seeing a lot of deaths. And that means this thing is quite well under control at this stage of the game. It's still being used as a cudgel to control people. But, we've gotten essentially to herd immunity at this point. And it's not nearly as worrisome as it used to be. They don't want to let it go because it's a matter of control. But we do have to worry about just opening the floodgates and worry about the impact that has. No nation can long survive when it doesn't have borders, when it doesn't have rules,
right.
when it selectively enforces some rules and doesn't enforce the others. That creates lawlessness and a sense of entitlement. And it's also hurting the people who are here, people who were born here, people who are here illegally, people who immigrated the right way, in many cases spent many years trying to get here. That's just totally unfair to them. And, there are certainly things that we can do. We can have a much better guest worker program.
Sure.
But that doesn't entitle you to citizenship. If you want to be a citizen, you have to go through the same thing that anybody else goes through to become a citizen.
It's a privilege.
They're just logical things that we could do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a privilege to be a citizen here. It's not a right.
Right.
And so we're looking at this border crisis, and nothing's being done about it, Dr. Carson. It just continued to the floodgates are open, literally. And
well, I guarantee you that if all the people who were coming over were likely to be voters in the conservative wing, they'd be doing all kinds of things about it.
Yes, that's what a lot of people say, that part of so you probably agree with this statement, part of the motivation of doing this is that they're bringing in their own voters in a way, aren't they?
They think that.
Yeah.
They may be surprised. They may be letting in a lot of people who really have a sense of responsibility, who want to work, who may not necessarily identify with the rest of their politics.
Yeah, well, so let's go back to COVID. I'm sure you're aware of and you alluded to this earlier, I'm sure you're aware of the data dump of Dr. Fauci's emails.
Yes.
And so, and it's astounding because it's everything a lot of us suspected the entire way through. The masks don't work. We were funding gain of function research to China. Dr.
Which is
Fauci,
pretty amazing.
It's pretty amazing, just that alone. Even though he told Rand Paul weeks ago that he was totally incorrect, that wasn't the case. So as a neurosurgeon, a doctor that's done amazing things in his career and somebody that was part of the administration, what has been your reaction, your internal thoughts as you've read through some of those emails? What do you think?
Well, it just reinforces what I've always said, and that is mixing science and medicine with politics results in disaster. You just can't do it when you try to manipulate the science to fit into a particular political ideology.
Right.
And that unfortunately is what's done, and it compromises the integrity of all the people involved in it. Even though they may be good people and they want to do what's right, some of the people I've known for many, many years, and they're good people, but they've been compromised.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like Dr. Fauci is seriously compromised at this point.
It's sad. Let's hope he can recover. I don't know if you can recover a reputation in this kind of situation.
No, I mean, so much damage has been done over the last 18 months to the economy. I even said to a friend of mine, I think the psyche of America has been seriously damaged after we have been controlled this long. What do you think?
Oh, I think it has, and I'm very concerned about our children. You know, I was a pediatric neurosurgeon, and my focus was children.
Yeah.
And I think about these young children who have to wear masks to go to school, and their teachers wear masks, and they don't get to see people's facial expressions, which is an important part of the socialization process.
Right.
Plus, they're told that they could be infectious, and even though they might not be sick, they could kill their grandmother. And of
Right.
course, the grandmother eventually dies, and now they're thinking, "Did I do that?"
Right.
You know, what the guilt, and then if they're white, you know, you and your parents and your grandparents and all these, they're horrible, horrible people. They've caused every problem that anybody has. If you're black, you're a victim. The system is totally against you. You can't succeed. You know, what does that do to a person's psyche as they're developing? And then to top all that off, you may not actually be a girl. You may not actually be a boy. What does that do to somebody's psyche as they're trying to develop into reasonable human beings?
Yeah, absolutely. That is, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And then, of course, Ron DeSantis, the governor, got criticized for signing the bill. That makes so much sense. You can't have transgender women competing with other women. That doesn't work that way. That's not fair.
It's totally unfair. It's completely unreasonable. And that doesn't mean that we can't have some transgender games or whatever. But it's like when I was at HUD, you know, got a lot of grief because I didn't feel that transgender men should be able to go into a women's shelter. And the women didn't feel that way either. I had tons and tons of, they didn't want, some of the women said, we would rather sleep in the forest. You know, what's the purpose of having a women's shelter if, you know, other entities are there? That's why it's called a women's shelter.
Right.
It's not just called a person shelter. There are shelters for people
Right.
who, you know.
No, it's, well, or yeah, you can't just identify as a woman and come in there. That doesn't make any sense. It's got a lot to do with what's going on in our culture overall. And Dr. Carson, you've always been forward and very open about your faith, and which I really appreciate. I know everybody else does that follows you, and you know, a lot of people feel right now that the United States is in such decline that we may never be able to recover from where we are right now. What's your honest assessment of where we are right now as a nation overall and how it's changed since the new administration took control?
Well, it's amazing how rapidly things can turn around with the right policies
Right.
or with the wrong policies.
It's true.
So rapid change. Do I think we're done for? No, I do not. I believe that this is a wake-up call. You know, I believe we were slowly sliding into socialism, like the frog in the saucepan.
Right.
Now it's sort of like someone taking a cold fish and slapping everybody in the face. I think they're going to wake up. You know, my fear is that when the conservatives gain control, and they will, that they say, let's get rid of these people to make sure this kind of thing never happens again. I mean, that's what I mean when I say somebody's got to be the adult. It can't just always be quid pro quo. They did this, we're going to do even worse to them.
Right.
Because all we do is lurch from left to right to left to right. We never make any forward progress. It's time to make forward progress.
Absolutely. And you know, that's a great point, because you know, you and I both know that, you know, Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich learned how to work together. Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan learned how to work together. Tip O'Neill put that budget forward almost within the first month of Reagan's first term, because they had dinner together, right? And got to know each other. In fact, Tip O'Neill walked into the speaker's office and said, we're putting the president's budget to the floor. And his chief of staff thought he was crazy. And Tip O'Neill's answer should be kind of a signal to the other side. He said, we have to do what's right for America. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's such an important point, because, you know, there are those, quite frankly, who don't like America.
Right.
And they want to see it fundamentally change to something else. Now, with those individuals, I'm not sure you can reach an appropriate accommodation if you love America and what America stands for. But, you know, there are a lot of people on the left side who are not those America hating people, who are people who can be worked with, who want to have a place where there's liberty and justice for all. And those are the people we have to work with. On the right side, there are those who are so set in their ways and have their little pet peeves that they just say, no, I can't support this, without looking at the alternative,
Right.
without recognizing that if you don't support, those individuals who actually love and cherish what America represents, even though you may have a little disagreement with them,
Right.
then you are actually supporting the other side and contributing to the downfall of the nation that you love.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's go to election integrity. I know you had a lot to say about the companies in Georgia coming out against this bill, but in truth, once again, they're calling racism on this bill. Dr. Carson, is it racist to ask for a voter ID and make sure we have election integrity?
I think what is racist is to assume that certain people are too stupid to get a voter ID. That's what's really racist.
Yeah, no, that is racist. And I'm sure you've heard the president saying that African Americans don't have CPAs or lawyers. He continues to make those kinds of comments, but
well, he made the most racist statement I think I've ever heard when he said, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black.
That's right.
I mean,
yeah.
He gets to decide who's black.
Yeah, he does. Absolutely. So obviously you're not black because you didn't.
Obviously not.
You're obviously not. So when you brought up 2022, it looks good for us, but we haven't fixed the issues that happened in 2020. So it's very, while I know that the other side continues. In fact, to be honest, every time President Biden or Kamala Harris open their mouth, they're actually helping our side quite a bit because we see the contrast. How are we going to fix this in time? Because it's not fixed yet.
Well, I think the arguments are already being made, and that's why you see in several states legislative fixes for what happened in previous elections, just trying to make sure that they're transparent, they're fair and honest. The people who are claiming, Jim Crow, 2.0, don't realize that we actually have more minorities who are voting now than ever before. I don't think anybody's trying to keep minorities from voting. We just want to make sure that anytime a vote is cast, a legitimate vote is cast, it's not canceled out by something that is inappropriate. You look at there were over 1,000 people with affidavits who observed severe irregularities.
Right.
All of that's just been pretty much ignored, and not just ignored, but people who question the election are being punished,
right,
and sometimes being canceled. Now, think about that. If there was nothing to hide, why would you be doing that? It's sort of like you stole the cookies from the cookie jar, and then you say no one may talk about the cookie jar,
right,
without severe penalty.
Right, exactly. Well, in Georgia, one of the counties is already lawyered up because they don't want a recount to take place there. They sent 100 lawyers to Arizona, Dr. Carson. Doesn't that tell us something?
It does. And also, with all the recounts, they say we recounted it twice. Well, if you're recounting the same, defective results, of course you're going to get the same result.
Right. So you can't throw up your hands and say we did it. It's okay now, right? So do you feel a certain level of confidence that we're going to have this as fixed as possible for 2022? Because if not, we're going to get the same result.
Well, the Bible says your sins will find you out. You're not going to be able to hide this stuff forever. And I think there are enough people who are doing some significant investigations now.
Yeah.
I think the truth will come out. And that should be something that we're all concerned about.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you're on, because it's a fundamental pillar and principle of a democratic republic such as the one we have.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. Dr. Carson, let's go to a couple of other issues. I know you're observing what's going on internationally. The present administration is for a two-state solution in Israel. And I want just talk to us about that, because that is contrary to our policy. That our policy has been very clear with Israel. Israel is our closest ally, both strategically and, of course, biblically. So what do you think about that current stance of the administration? And is it destabilizing the Middle East because of it?
Well, you have to recognize that in the previous administration, uh, very significant treaties and accords were reached, historic in nature, and the whole tension was reduced dramatically.
Yeah.
In fact, this is Nobel Prize winning stuff that was
Yeah.
going on.
Yes.
All of that has been reversed. Overtures being made to Iran, which is the world's greatest sponsor of terrorism. And of course, they are the ones who are supplying Hamas with those weapons
Right.
that allowed all of that shelling. It is exactly the wrong way to go. All you have to do is be even semi-objective to say, we are moving in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Things were going so well, and now everything is just going to pot. And it's not a coincidence. It's because of the policies that have been enacted.
Absolutely. So speaking of those policies, the president administration shut down the Keystone, but they then turned around and opened up the pipeline for Russia. And I, not only in two full swoops, they took down the Keystone pipeline. So we're not energy independent anymore. And now we just gave a shot in the arm to Russia's economy. And
yeah, and
go ahead.
In a normal society, this would not be happening because the press would be all over it,
Right.
pointing out, how illogical it was. But the press just sort of goes along willy-nilly with whatever the left is asking them to do, fully non-cognizant of what normally happens in a communist or socialist society.
Yeah.
And that is they totally control the press.
Absolutely.
So they don't realize that they're making their own bed up. But here we were in a situation where we were energy independent. We were a net exporter of energy. The prices at the pump were very reasonable, and that's particularly good for small businesses and people who have to do a lot of transporting. And it decreased our dependency on the outside and gave us considerable latitude in negotiations.
Absolutely.
We've thrown all that away.
We have.
What a logical person would do is they would say, we've done a great job with our energy production. We would like to get to a point where we're just using renewable green energy. So this is a great time for us to be working on that while we enjoy the fruits of what we've already produced. And then we can gradually substitute as it becomes a reasonable economic thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dr. Carson, a couple of other things. So we have seen this administration, and with his most recent bill that he's proposing, he will have spent, if he gets this approved, $6 trillion. That's a huge, huge number. And infrastructure now falls under every category, as you probably know. It can be anything they want it to be. Dr. Carson, what is that in your estimation? Where the economy was a year ago. We were humming along, doing great, and look where we are now. In fact, I've got two-part question. Let's talk about the $6 trillion and what this is going to do to the economy. What's your answer on that?
Well, it's going to produce enormous inflation.
Yeah.
We've seen this story before in Argentina, in Venezuela, in places where you're paying, $1,000 or $1 million for a loaf of bread. It totally destroys, the quality of life that we have for people, and not to mention our children and our grandchildren.
Right.
Somebody's going to have to pay this back.
Right.
And, it was Thomas Jefferson who said it's immoral to steal from future generations. He
Yeah.
would have a stroke if he could see what was going on here today.
Yeah, he would. Absolutely. I was going to ask you what you think the founders would say. So you said you answered it for me. So, and then going to another policy, which is that I call it a bad comp plan. We are paying people to stay out of work right now. And
Right.
that is just contrary to the American spirit, isn't it?
It is. And, I certainly feel for people. I want people to do well. I want them to climb the ladders of opportunity. That's why we reoriented so many of our programs when I was at HUD toward self-sufficiency, not toward dependency.
Right.
But basically what we're doing is making people dependent and making people, it's Khrushchev who said many years ago to Eisenhower, he said, your grandchildren's children will live under communism and won't have to fire a shot. Why? Because he knew that all they have to do is infiltrate the educational system and indoctrinate the kids, gain control of the media so you could spoon feed the people what you wanted them to hear and eliminate those things you did not want them to hear, which you can see that all over today.
Yeah.
Replace faith in God with faith in government.
Yes.
And raise the national debt to enormous levels so that you could justify massive taxation and redistribution of wealth, putting a stranglehold on everything and making the government the supreme power.
That's exactly what they've done, because now the government is the purveyor of truth, of dependence, and everything else now. And so it's really changed this dynamic. Dr. Carson, one of my listeners wanted me to ask you this, and I think I know what your answer is going to be. You've had such an amazing life. They made a movie about you. You've been part of President Trump's cabinet. You've got this brand new foundation you've started. What do you think is your greatest accomplishment in life?
That's a very good question. And I don't know that I have one greatest accomplishment, but as I travel around the country, I very frequently meet up with people who say, my parents told me that you operated on me when I was a little baby.
Yeah.
They're doing great. I just want to thank you. Giving people a second chance.
Yeah.
At climbing that ladder of the American dream, becoming successful, happy, and giving back.
Yeah.
That's the greatest accomplishment. And, in terms of the surgeries, it doesn't have to be the headline grabbing surgeries.
Right.
It just has to be something that you've done to give somebody else that chance.
Absolutely. What a great answer. And by the way, that headliner that you referred to, those twins are alive and well, and they're thriving, aren't they?
We've done several sets of twins. One of the ones that particularly interesting was ones from Zambia that
Yeah.
we did in South Africa. They were type 2 vertical craniopathies. They're young adults now.
Yeah.
Doing just well.
Yeah, that's great. Dr. Carson, a lot of people wanted me to ask you this. Do you ever plan on running for office?
It is not something that I would like to do.
Yeah.
Of course, I didn't really want to run the first time I ran. I was
you got drafted.
Persuaded.
You got drafted.
You
were persuaded. A lot of I was one of them behind you. But what you did at HUD was amazing. You really changed everything there, and unfortunately, that's being undone. Dr. Carson, when we're talking about this, would be great if you could answer this, because I know that you're aware that a lot of groups are out there trying to get the truth out, which is really important. But there's this rumor flying around, which I'm sure you know what I'm going to bring up, that there are certain people that are surrounding President Trump that are saying that he's going to be reinstated in August. And so, first of all, I know some constitutional lawyers pretty well. You know the Sekulows. I know Jenna Ellis. There is no mechanism to do that after everything that's happened. Is that even possible?
Well, everything is unprecedented.
Right.
So we don't know. But my suspicion is that there will continue to be a gigantic effort to suppress any evidence that would allow that to happen anyway.
Right.
So you've got evidence. it could be very impressive, but it really doesn't matter if it doesn't come to light.
Absolutely true. Dr. Carson, it has been an honor to have you on again. We really appreciate you joining us. God bless you, sir.
Thank you, Mark. I'll look forward to the next time.
Absolutely. This is the Patriot and the Preacher Show. That was Dr. Ben Carson, and we'll be right back.